The gospel lesson for today is from St. Mark's Gospel in the 5th chapter, beginning at the 21st verse. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be well and live." And so Jesus went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. And now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said to herself, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." And immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. And then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. And he took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha, come," which means, "Little girl, get up." Then immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. Here ends the lesson. In the Message translation of this morning's gospel lesson, Eugene Peterson has translated that verse where the crowds were following Jesus as the crowds were tagging along. The crowd was tagging along with Jesus, obviously, to see what happened. It made me think of tagging along, and as I go back to Illinois on vacation and reunite with a lot of my family and friends, I think about all the times I was tagging along. Do you remember who you used to tag along with? When you were a kid, who was it you wanted to tag along with? I can remember never being able to get out of the house. When you have 4 children, as we did, you know, you'd sometimes like to get out of the house by yourself, other than going to work. But when you have 4 children, that's not possible because somebody wants to tag along. And especially as a young boy, I always wanted to tag along with my father. And my son was like that too. So almost everywhere I went, I had to take Mark along. Now, of course, I think there were times when I was a little bit unhappy that he wanted to come along. And today I think about how foolish that was. I wish I had him to tag along with me more now. But he's grown up and he's got his own tagging along to do. Maybe it was your grandparent. I remember one tagging along adventure. I was tagging along with my Uncle Bud. And he was, I was probably 10 or 11 years old, I think. He was driving a truck for the Marshall Field Company. Marshall Field's was the big and somewhat exclusive, fairly expensive department store in Chicago. And so he would drive this Marshall Field's truck. And so during the summer, when kids don't have enough to do because they're not in school, he said to me, You want to tag along one day with me on the truck? Pfft, what a great invitation. Ride in a truck. You know, those trucks with the doors open on the side, the wind's blowing in, you're holding on. Before the days of seat belts and airbags, we wouldn't think of letting our kids do that now, but we did it all the time. So this was an amazing adventure for me. It was a learning experience. I saw things I had never seen before. We were delivering to very wealthy homes, for instance, circular driveways. A couple of places, servants came to the door. I had never seen that. I had no idea of what that was like. And at one point, we had to go into the garment district in Chicago. And you've seen these kinds of things on movies if you haven't lived in any big city where you could see it. But every square foot of space is taken up by people or goods and boxes, and trucks are delivering, and people are running all over the place, and every kind of immigrant you could imagine was working in the garment district. And the smells and the food smells, there were carts with food being prepared and all sorts of things for the people who were working there. It was a tremendous experience for me, and it was the first place I had an Italian ice. My uncle said, let's get an Italian ice. I didn't know what that was. He hands me this cup, which in today's prices, it would probably be about $65. I don't know, because the Italian ices now, you know, are really small. But this was a big cup, and it was so good. I came home, the first thing I said to my mother was, I had an Italian ice. We have to get some of that. She said, yeah, sure, okay. That's a great idea. Could you go outside now? Anyway, it was a great learning experience. I had this thought because this tagging along is much of what the New Testament is about. People were just tagging along to see what was going on. Some more connected to Jesus, some not connected at all. But they were tagging along. They wanted to see what was going to happen. They wanted to experience something that was entirely different. And so what they experienced, those who were thinking, and those who were focused, and those who were open to new experience, what they experienced opened up a new world to them, new possibilities. In fact, it was a new reality to see what Jesus was doing and what Jesus said. A new reality, a new experience, something you'd never thought of before. When's the last time that happened to you? When's the last time something happened that was amazing to you? Something that made you just sit up straight and think, wow. I think for Holly and Matthew, it was obviously when their children were born, and for many of us, that was one time. But in any other aspect of life, have you had that experience? Have you had it lately? Are you open to that? Or would you say, I'd rather not be surprised by life, you know? I kind of like things the way they are. Some of us in this room, I'm not going to call out names, although I could. If you move a lamp from one table to another, this is an unhappy experience. You know, you like things the way they are. But I'm talking about bigger things, more important things. Seeing the world through new eyes. Having a fresh realization of the possibilities which are open to you, no matter what your circumstances or your age. Discovering something which inspires you or renews confidence or even heals you spiritually. When's the last time you had that experience? That's what people were having as they were tagging along with Jesus in today's gospel story. And there's an interesting variety of people. Jairus, who we're told in the story was a leader of the synagogue, would have been the executive type. He was probably wealthy. He was probably a man of status and accomplishment. He was probably well-dressed and well-spoken. He was the kind of person you would expect to see in very high places in corporations or government or whatever.